Today I will be talking about the 3 questions of the Daily Scrum. Scrum is an empirical process which relies on different feedback loops. Now these 3 questions happen to be at the innermost feedback loop, which is the Daily Scrum. Every day, every team member answers these questions, and they are: what did I do yesterday that helped the development team meet the sprint goal? What will I do today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? Did I see any impediment that prevents me or the development team from meeting the sprint goal? Now these questions have been copied from the most recent Scrum guide. In the past, they were phrased slightly differently. Let's have a look. A couple of years ago, they were phrased like this: what have you done since last Scrum? What will you do between now and the next Scrum? What got in your way of doing work? Now, as you see, they have been softened up a little and they talk more about the team. I think that's a good thing, but the topic of today is a little different. So what is the topic of today are my observations when being in teams and outside teams asking these questions. Now, the first and foremost observation, it sounds kind of obvious, but it's to study whether people are communicating with each other or reporting. Now, reporting could look like this. People look away, they look towards a manager or the Scrum Master, and they're no longer attached to the team. They're just communicating with that single person. And that usually is reporting, as opposed to looking around to other team members, telling them, I've done this, I'm going to do that. That is most likely not reporting, that's communicating. So let's hit the questions. How are people answering the first one? Now the first question is actually about what's happened in the past. And I've observed that people can say several things. For example, if progress is slow, a person says, I've done little yesterday, or my progress hasn't been good, or something like that, then you usually want to listen for impediments. You want that person to say, I've had this kind of impediment, that thing made me go slow. If people are having trouble telling other people what they've done, I would suggest that you look at the planning, because if the tasks are unclear, it's obviously very hard to tell what you've done if your task is not clear. So look into the planning, look at the planning. What's very cool about this question is also that you can find people's values here. Now, a typical situation is, for example, with developers is people say, I was supposed to do this quick hack, but instead I've done this nice refactoring. And that is sort of a value, because this is a person valuing good quality work. So if people say, I should have done this, but I did this instead, that usually indicates a value. Finally, you can also spot another dysfunction, which is when people say, we've been in a meeting all day, we didn't do anything. And that is usually a cue for you to look into how the organization works. So, how about answering the question of what will I do today? Now, the most important thing in this question, I would say, is looking at whether people are trying to invite others to share their work. A good sign of people communicating about their work is when people say, okay, I'm doing this task, and probably in a few hours it's going to involve that kind of work, at which I happen to know that you are very good at, pointing at another team member. So they are inviting, they are synchronizing, they are telling other people what they do, where they will need help, and where they will share work. And that's something very, very powerful. The other thing to listen for is when people are having a hard time saying what they will be doing. And that is usually, again, an indication of a poor planning process, because if the tasks on the Scrum board are unclearly defined, then obviously it's going to be very, very hard to to pick a task like that and say, okay, I'm gonna do this, except for I don't know what this means. Okay, let's talk about impediments. Now, in my experience, this is the hardest question. I haven't really seen a situation where a team really operates like this. Team members just say, okay, I've had this kind of impediment, how are we going to solve it? Instead, my experience has been that this question is usually omitted. And that could mean several things. Well, first of all, it could mean, which it usually doesn't, is that the team is operating so smoothly that things are just getting solved as the team works. Most likely, I would say that not raising this question means that the team is not attuned to impediments or apathetic. I've been in teams where I could, during the first days in those teams, spot 10, 12, 20 issues that were blocking that particular team. And when I said to them, hey guys, you cannot release into production, you have no test environments, you don't have this, you cannot do that, these are impediments. And they said, yeah, but we know that and we can't change it, so we're not saying anything about that. So that's the danger in this question. So listen for what's not there when this question is answered. So we've covered the 3 questions, and there was one more thing, and that's the duration of the meeting. Now, usually the meeting can take forever, far longer than 15 minutes or something. And that could mean 2 things. Either the team is just not very used to having these meetings and they sort of forget what questions they were supposed to answer. But most likely, and I'm saying it for the 3rd time today, it's because of the planning meeting. The planning has been poor enough to leave some unresolved issues that the team has to deal with during the daily scrum. And they have to do that, and that sort of makes the daily scrum too long. These are my observations. I'm quite sure that you differ, so please do leave a video response or a comment.